May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. So I thank you all for your faithful attendance today, even on this absolutely gorgeous fall day. Beautiful colors. So for the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about faith, and we're going to talk about that again this week. 2 weeks ago, Jesus answered his disciples' plea for increased faith. He just asked them to forgive people 7 times 7. And they were like, oh, please increase our faith, because that's really hard. And he answered their plea for increased faith with the parable of the mustard seed. Jesus exhorted them to a humble faith, a faith that is doing what we should do anyway, a faith whose opposite is not doubt, but certainty, a faith that brings our whole authentic, often messy selves to the table. And then last week, we heard Jesus healing the 10 lepers, and of the one, the outsider, the Samaritan, who returned to rejoice. And in that example of returning and rejoicing, we are called to deepen our faith in the joyous celebration of what God does for us, even in the midst of hardship, even in those places of uncertainty and living in between, the places where we suffer from doubt and from uncertainty. And that brings us to this week and the parable of the persistent widow, which, wow, what an amazing job of beautiful reading today from Deacon Nancy, right? You could just really feel it. The widow in Jesus' time was not the same as it is now. The widow in Jesus' time was symbolic of somebody about as far away from power and resources as people could get. It was the symbol of someone in need of protection and also respect, someone with whom the community is expected to share their resources. And we see examples of this throughout Exodus, Deuteronomy, in the rules for the Jewish faith. The widow is also, in the Jewish faith of Jesus' time, symbolic of tenaciousness, of initiative, and of wisdom, as we see in Ruth, Naomi, and others in the Hebrew Bible, and also here in Luke with Anna. Do you all remember Anna, the prophet, who recognizes Jesus at the beginning of his life, at the beginning of the Gospel of Luke? These are all also examples of widows. The perfect character for Jesus to make his point about persistence, right? As he so often does, Jesus creates a complex relationship in this story, pitting her against a judge who has no fear of God and no respect for anyone. And yet she persists, bugging him to the point that he finally gives in. Listen to what the unjust judge says, Jesus says to his disciples. And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. He will quickly grant justice to them. The widow's persistence, tellingly and importantly, was not aimed towards wealth, power, status, the things that we often are told to persist and keep trying and have a hard work ethic in order to obtain. No. Her persistence, her tenacity was aimed towards justice. She had faith that justice would, if she was bold enough, tenacious enough, that justice would be served. And so, Jesus tells us, if this judge who respects no one and has no fear of God, will grant justice to one as bold and determined and on the margins as this widow, then you can have faith that God, who loves and chooses you, who became incarnate for you, will grant you justice. In his second letter to Timothy, Paul tells him to proclaim the message. Be persistent whether the time is favorable or unfavorable. Convince, rebuke, encourage with the utmost patience in teaching. For the time is coming when people will not put up with sound doctrine, but have itching ears. They will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own desires and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander away to myths. And as for you, always be sober, endure suffering, do the work of an evangelist, carry out your ministry fully. We are in a time where certainty is all too often mistaken for faith, where evangelism has come to mean asking people to leave the vulnerable, questioning, messy parts of themselves at the door and believe whole hog, no questions asked, in a set of absolutes that coincidentally often seems to best serve those in power. This widow couldn't be certain of her outcome. Confident maybe, but not certain. And yet she kept on going. That's faith. It must have been brutal for her to go day after day, as it is for so many people who keep showing up and demanding justice. But she believed in justice. She believed in God's favor for her cause, not for her wants and her desires, but for her cause. We so want certainty, and often, though we prefer not to admit it, authority to show us the way, a set of rules and beliefs that we need to follow. Truth that is absolute rather than fluid and organic and moving and relational. And we turn away from the seeking, from the asking of questions, from the persisting and patience and the suffering in those moments of, oh, how is this going to turn out? But that patience to just keep persisting is vital to faith. When we talk about faith in the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Church, when we talk about spreading the good news, it's not about asking people to give up their doubts or to stop asking so many questions and believe this or that. It's about inviting them into a conversation about love, about God, about Jesus. It's about the questions and the seeking. It's about persisting for justice and rejoicing in the beauty and mercy that God consistently offers us, even in the darkest moments. It's about returning to God again and again and again through gratitude, through relationship, through rejoicing, through study, through prayer, and always in love, always in knowing that we are loved and those with us are loved. We asked in the collect today that God preserve the works of your mercy, that your church throughout the world may persevere with steadfast faith in the confession of your name. Evangelize the faith, my friends. Go out into the world. Persist for justice. Rejoice in God's love. Heal. Spread the good news of our belovedness. Each and every one of us as our full, doubting, questioning, imperfect, wonderful, tenacious selves. That full, beautiful, embodied belovedness that we find in Jesus. Go out and evangelize your faith. May it be so.